As you move into the end of the course and begin editing the final project, I just had a few comments to make regarding the steps you might want to take as you look at these projects again. First, we need to kind of distinguish in the goals of editing here. Editing includes deciding on the piece that you'd like to revise and or develop. So look at the pieces you've written so far in the course carefully and decide which ones seem to have the most kind of open territory for addition or expansion. Don't be afraid to take a piece that you may not think is your best, because there may be more room to kind of work with that one. Work with a piece that you're excited about, that tells a story that's interesting to you, whether that's fiction, nonfiction, or whether it's an artistic selection of poems you've written so far in the course. So make a selection that's going to provide some room for expansion here. Also distinguish between the different goals with editing. First, revision, which means that you're working at the larger kind of organizational level of the piece of writing, and aspects of craft are included in that revision. That is how you build an argument, perhaps within an essay. If you're building an argumentative essay here, how you utilize point of view within fiction. Those basic kind of craft issues are important in revision. How you set boundaries to the story that you're telling in fiction or nonfiction. Those the beginning and endings of the stories are a question of revision here. You need to decide where you start and where you end, and also, how does each piece offer opportunities to expand on the work? Are you going to tell more of the story? Are you going to go into a moment of flashback within the story you've already told? Where in the piece offers the best opportunities for expansion? With editing, revision is distinguished from proofreading, which is working at the sentence level, where you're reading for errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, etc. Where you're trying to kind of put some final polish on the piece. Also, with proofreading, you might be editing for clarity. Are all the necessary details told within a particular scene or story? Word choice. Sometimes when you first write a piece, you realize the word is not exactly there, and you want to kind of puzzle out a new word or a new phrase to make sense. And also issues of formatting here, right? If you're doing dialogue, be sure you try to do it like is represented in our text examples, so it's clear who's speaking and when. If you're editing the nonfiction piece for submission with the final project, a few things to think about. First, the overall organization of the piece. If you're telling a story, read for the narrative arc, or how the story unfolds and how it builds, or for points of argument. If you're writing a more kind of argumentative essay, think about the argument that you're establishing and how it works emotionally on the reader, as well as how it is built within the components of statement of thesis, points of support and counter argument there. Also think about the unity of the piece. What larger theme or meaning is present within the developing essay? You should be able to apply the question of this is the story of, what is the larger meaning that's present? It can be, this is the story of the development of an identity here. This is the story of familial conflict. This is the story of a sense of ethnic identity. This is the story of sexual identity. There should be some basic kind of larger meaning that the story unfolds and represents there, that is theme. Within the storytelling are all essential details told. If you're telling a story, a nonfiction story, does the reader know everything that needs to be told? What's the order of those details here? Be sure to make sure that all the essential details are present within the storytelling. And then also think about the stylistic unity of the language. How does the language work to set up an underlying emotion for the essay that's there? If you're thinking about the fiction piece for the final project, most importantly from the outset, be sure that there's a consistency to the point of view, whether you're writing this in third or first person. If it's in third person, does the storytelling, is it a close third person that stays close to one character, or does it range from character to character. Make sure that there's a certain consistency that's established there. If you're telling in first person, it needs to be close to that storytelling eye throughout the piece. Think about the characters and how they're detailed, how they emerge and develop. A good question always when you look at a character is to think about what is it that the central character wants, and how does that want set up possible collisions with other characters or within the character self that kind of drive the story and its central conflicts. Is the plot clear? First of all, think about the boundaries of the story, its beginning and ending. Are you giving us enough detail that's there? Do you need to go into a flashback moment within the storytelling to make the plot of this story make sense? Is there a central tension or conflict that emerges clearly for the reader within the storytelling? Think about the clarity of plot, particularly within those elements. Is there an emerging theme or focus that connects the reader, that draws the reader's empathy towards the character or characters? Is there a larger meaning there that will engage the reader? And then finally, edit at the sentence level within the fiction for voice and style. So there's a kind of a clarity to these things within the storytelling. If you choose to develop more poems for the final project, a few things to think about here. First, don't be afraid to experiment with form within your writing. So there's always kind of a play within a collection of poems between how the poems themselves like range and experiment in some ways, and in what ways are they consistent. I would always like a collection of poetry to have kind of a consistent sense of the line to it, that the lines have a kind of a similar path of development, a similar shape and sound and form. But don't be afraid to kind of try different kinds of subject matter. Don't be afraid to try different lengths of poem. If you want to write a 5-page poem with a series of shorter 1-page poems, that would be great. Don't be afraid to experiment here. Push the development of individual poems as well. Kind of reread the poems and think about them on the level of revision. That is so a lot of times poems try to explain too much instead of like drawing a figure, setting up an image, sounding out a voice. A lot of times they'll try to the poet will step aside, usually in the first or last lines, and give us the meaning, straight out. You don't have to do that in the poem. Let the poem itself be the artwork that develops these things. Don't feel like you have to explain it to the reader in the end. Think about the clarity of the poems themselves, as they build meaning. How do the logopoeic, the phanopoeic, the melopoeic, and the mythopoeic elements work together to construct that meaning? You might want to go back and review the short presentation on building meaning within poems to think about how each of these elements are present within each of your own poems here. And also reconsider the order of the poems. Writers will call these kind of short books like chapbooks. So what you're writing is basically like a 10-page chapbook. Think about how one poem leads to the next, to the next, to the next. Is there a kind of focus that develops within that order? Quite often the most important poem is the first poem and the last poem. So think about how the other poems work within the meaning that you're trying to establish within those poems as well. If you want to add a short kind of introductory section that's in prose to your poems, feel free to do that as well. 1 or 2 pages at most, but feel free to do that as you develop the final project. Thanks for your work. I look forward to reading your projects.